Welcome to another episode of Marvel Cinematic University, the show that talks about everything in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I am your host for now, Jay Christie. Anthony is running a little late, but Anthony Canton III will be with us in a few minutes. But we got two exciting guests that we got to get to. They are co-authors of the upcoming book that we're very excited for, MCU: The Reign of Marvel Studios. It's Dave Gonzales and Joanna Robinson. Dave and Joanna, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you so
Thanks
much
for
for having
having us.
us.
Yeah.
And so we are here first off to talk about the second episode of Secret Invasion, the current show that Marvel has on. And while we have you and while Anthony's running a little late, I'm just curious, what were your original impressions going in? How did you feel about the first episode before we just start covering the second one?
Yeah, I was excited to see what this series is going for. I love the Marvel Cinematic Universe because it can be so wacky, and I grew up reading comics, so seeing that sort of type of plotting move out into the general public and be appreciated, or in some cases rejected by them, has been really exciting. So this year has been, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania and Guardians Volume 3. One very weird inner space, one very weird outer space. So I was excited to return back to Earth and see what the new status quo was in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So I was excited going into the first episode. I think the first episode has some lackluster action photography that made me sort of raise an eyebrow, together with the opening, which I didn't enjoy for a couple of reasons. That being said, it is only a 6 episode limited series, so one of six is plenty of time to set the table. And I was really excited to see episode 2 sort of define what we're actually doing here a little bit more, because I think episode 1 was a great reintroduction to Fury, who's been gone and has been damaged. But now we're getting into the plots, hopefully.
Joanna?
Yeah. Yeah, I want to echo what Dave said about like being so excited when the MCU decides to do very specific flavors of something, and I'm a huge fan of the espionage genre in general. So to know that they were going to take Secret Invasion, which is like a, big popular comic crossover event, and put it through the filter of the John le Carre sort of spy came in from the cold sort of stories that we've seen over the years and loved, and then to use Nick Fury, our consummate Marvel spy, as part of all of that, that got me so excited. And then as the casting news came in, and you're like, Amelia Clark is here, Olivia Coleman's here, what are we doing, let's go, Kingsley Benadire, et cetera, et cetera. So my hopes were really, really high. And I was actually very excited for like a 6 episode, like very contained, very purposeful story. And they're calling it like a contained event, right? So there's not going to be a Secret Invasion season 2. Like this is it start to finish, unless this becomes like their most popular show, which so far unfortunately it is not. And then I watched episode 1, and it was a little drier and a little slower than I wanted, even though I like can enjoy a dry, slow spy story with the rest of them. There were pockets of greatness, most of it provided by the impeccable Olivia Coleman, who can do anything anywhere. And yeah, that's where I am. But we're not alone anymore. We should
Yes.
say
No.
hello.
Yes, the wonderful Anthony Canton III, who I'm tossing over hosting duties. Like, we just finished discussing what they thought about episode 1, so you really didn't miss much. I mean, you missed all the great chat before the show, but you didn't miss anything on the show.
well,
Uh,
well, firstly, greetings and salutations to both of you. Appreciate having you on. Sorry for showing up like Nick Fury, showing up as late as Nick Fury has to this Skrull invasion situation. This is what happens when you have 2 kids.
Yeah, but at least you weren't just like chilling on a space station. You were taking care of
yeah.
children.
Yeah.
So.
Wonderful stuff, wonderful stuff. But yes, episode 2, promises, where there's a lot of stuff that happened in this episode, and I think that more so than anything else, I think the highlight was the acting all over. There was a lot of just really chewy, meaty scenes that, I mean, when you talk about Sam Jackson or Don Cheadle, Olivia Coleman herself, just incredible stuff. Kingsley Benadir, just like all over the place. There's a lot of places to go, but I think I'll start with this in particular. Because I think a lot of the talk about episode 1 was a little bit how slow it was. In lamest terms, I felt like it was MCU for dummies as they tried to, exposition their way and let the casuals know what's going on. But in this instance, we felt like a lot more plot advancement. And Joanna, I'll start with you in terms of what we got as far as Fury is concerned. We see this little backstory with the meeting with the Skrulls and the relationship with Gravik and how that develops. As far as that's concerned, what did you think about Fury's plot advancement as we moved along in episode 2?
I thought it was so interesting. Like, two things were really interesting to me. Number one is like we got a hint of his sort of more personal connection to Gravik in episode 1 when Talos tells him sort of like Gravik took your absence especially hard. And so we're like, okay, there's something like personal there. So to see him meet Gravik when Gravik is a child, Gravik has lost his parents, to know that they have like 3 decades of history, these two people, and especially like Gravik maybe looking up to Fury, all that sort of stuff. I think we love this idea in the MCU, and they come back to it time and time again of like, you create your own demons. That's a Tony Stark line, but like we love that idea as it propagates. And so like as Talos accuses him, as Rhodey accuses him, as Gravik in absentia accuses him, we see all the ways in which Nick Fury's failings or his running away from a problem has provided the current circumstances that he's grappling with. So I love that, right? Nick Fury not innocent, right? There's a lot of things that are tough looks for our guy here. And then of course, the scene between Samuel L. Jackson and Don Cheadle is so as you say, like chewy, dense, complicated layers upon layers. The performance and the like sort of personal fire that both of these actors brought into that scene was really compelling to watch. And what is also true, Samuel L. Jackson has talked a lot in press interviews about this idea of Nick Fury as a lone gunman. And to get to a lone gunman space, you have to watch this person lose everything, right? So we saw him lose Maria Hill in the first episode. Here he's been kicked out by Rhodey in this episode, comes home to his wife who is a Skrull, and we don't know if he knows she's a Skrull. We don't know. Like we have a lot of questions about that, right? Big revelation. So will something happen that he loses that as well, and then he truly has nothing, and then and Talos, he kicks Talos off the train, right? So he's just sort of like shedding allies. So what is going to be left when it's just Nick Fury versus this problem?
Yes, well, I mean, when you think about it, when you're at wit's end, and I love to use the term #washed agenda because Fury's out here being cooked. He's just,
you guys listen to the first episode, so but I really can't emphasize enough how this one he's lucky because it's about a 70-year-old person, but he'll find any story. He'll find one person like mildly limp and be like, "Yep, I see myself in that guy."
Yeah,
I think the thing that's amazing, you have this great scene with Fury and Rhodes. They're going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Rhodes just kicks him out, but Fury makes sure he gets in that one last line, which is a wonderful line. Then he strong arms his guard, and then it's like, okay, we see a little physicality. The old dog still got it, but then he goes outside and sits down, and man looks like he needs a bed. He needs a cot. He needs to sleep. Oh my goodness, just incredible stuff from Sam Jackson there. Just very, very excited. But Dave, I also wanted to get your perspective on Nick, and I think I want to move to the Talos scene because that was actually one that was underrated in its own right. The "Tell Me Something I Don't Know" game was a very fun scene. What did you think of that interplay and seemingly the back and forth that they had, where this is kind of the first time that we've seen a little bit of an impasse between the two?
Yeah, I mean, not only an impasse, but when you take the episode in a whole and all the revelations we have about Fury's background, it's sort of two dads that have not only failed their direct children or adopted children, but now apparently a whole race. And Talos obviously feels worse about that than Fury, but Fury has been colored by his experiences as a Black American to come out with the overall view that there isn't enough room on this planet. We don't have enough empathy on this planet to actually house another species, which is sad, but the scene walks you down the path to why he's there. I think like there's some amazing character work being done on this show, and I know there's like a rule in cinematic storytelling and television storytelling where you show and you don't tell. I actually like the telling more in Secret Invasion. Like, you don't have to show me, you know, the World Council people who like are exuding evil change their faces. Have Fury and Talos sit down, have a conversation on a train about, you know, both feeling for the other person and then Fury being like, wait, there's a million Skrulls here. Like, that is a exponentially different problem than what I thought, and apparently what Fury thought we were actually dealing with. Like,
Right.
it's already happened. We've been secretly invaded. And I also like setting it back in 97, and that way that we have, you know, years and years, decades of it, almost 2 decades of MCU history in universe for people to sort of swap in and out with their Skrull replacements. I think this episode did a great job of exploding the possibilities of the story world while also refocusing sort of on Fury and Talos and what their personal stakes are and whatever's happening.
I couldn't agree with that more. And before I throw it to Jake, I'm gonna take this time to once again say that where is Carol Danvers? Where is she in all this? Because again, did she leave for a couple of cigarettes and some milk? She never came back. What happened to her? We'll see in the Marvels.
Absentee mom, Carol
Oh my
Danvers.
god.
But what I love about that, you know,
Yes.
sorry to like jump in, but like what I love about that is that her absence is a core plot of the Marvels, right? Like there's resentment all over the
Right.
place for her, you know, so what she's dealing with. And like in its original scheduling, the Marvels was supposed to come out like right if Secret Invasion had the similar release date, right as Secret Invasion was ending, right?
Yes.
So it's almost like mirrors or bookends of like the Nick Fury abandonment, and the Carol's been gone a lot longer, right? And she comes back for Endgame and then just pieces out again. Like it's the Carol situation is a corner that they wrote themselves into of like, how do we
Mhm.
explain that Carol is just gone most of the time because she's way too overpowered and could end any conflict at any time. Yeah, it's a big question.
Right, for sure. And Jake, you know, back to the Fury point, from your perspective in this episode, what was the thing that stood out to you the most about the plot advancement that we got?
I think that, you know, Joanna brought up the lone gunman thing, and I think that like that is where he is, and I think that there's a lot of outside forces that are getting him there. But I think the thing that makes it interesting, and I think that makes most like lone, you know, one last ride stories interesting, is that he's not blameless for putting himself in this position. Like, he has isolated himself through his own failings, and that like you can tell in the scene with Rhodes that the Rhodes is kind of angry at him because he's like, if this was something that you reached out to me before, I could help you. But like, you are putting me in a position where like I can't stand by you anymore, because the thing about him, which I think he is having trouble understanding, is that, or maybe he doesn't want to understand, that he is not reliable Nick Fury mastermind anymore. And like, if he's not reliable, then he's not valuable to other people. Like, the whole thing about Nick Fury is that he is the guy that can keep everything in order, or, you know, be aware of all threats. And if people don't see him as that anymore, then they can't trust him. And I think he doesn't know what to do. He I think has lost his fastball of what to do when he walks into a room and people don't implicitly just trust him because he's Nick Fury. And I think that he's kind of unmoored because he had this crisis of faith, and now he's trying to solve another issue, but he can't. As you like to, he doesn't have the fastball's not. He's got to use his guile now. The fastball is only hitting 88. He's got to, you know, do
Slider change up, curveball,
Mhm.
baby. That's the
Yeah.
only way to go.
He's on the Greg Maddox regimen right now, and like, and so I think that the way that Samuel Jackson's playing that, I think, is really interesting, because it's not, because while obviously you're supposed to be on his side because you know the threat is real, he's not playing it as super competent guy against the world. It's like, you can see from the outside why people would be like, Nick, what are you doing? You're ragged, you know, got a big beard, you are talking crazy, you've been gone. Like, you understand why people that he's trust him are like, I'm sorry, man, you're in over your head. And so I like that, because it would be a bit annoying if people were to, if they were to try to treat Nick Fury being gone for 5 years as no big thing. Like, it's a big thing.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. And since we were talking about Rhodes and all this other stuff, I think the thing that I brought up in episode 1 was and I know, Joanna, this is kind of your corner here, as far as who's the Skrull and who's not a Skrull. The first,
Yeah.
the first glance in episode 1 when Rhodes is with President Ritson, I'm like, I don't know about all this. He seems a little too extra spy type for somebody who's more of a take charge type of person. And in this conversation that Fury and Rhodes has kind of leaves me on the fence, because Rhodes in a lot of ways is right in his words and in his emotions towards Fury, as far as putting him in a difficult position. However, at the same time, a well-trained Skrull that's been around for a while would know how to set Fury off and kind of be able to take control in that type of way. So, Joanna, I ask you, if you
Yes.
had to guess, do you think
Yeah.
there's a possibility that Rhodey is a Skrull?
I really think Brody is a Skrull.
Yeah, I'm kind of
And
close too.
I really, really do. And like, I think that what I really loved is the NATO scene was especially interesting, because like in this episode we meet the Squirrel Council, and
Yeah.
we find out that Christopher McDonald's character, the like, Fox News-esque Chris Stearns, is a Skrull. And so when he's on his channel and like undermining the Skrull narrative, that's a good indication to us that there might be Skrulls on either side of any, or like he's on their like Fox News saying like, this is a false flag, this is something else, you know what I mean? And so, but we know that he's may not be in on every level of Gravik's plot at that point, but like he knows what's going on, right? And so I don't think, like, at first glance, the NATO scene, because Rhodey is arguing with people who we know are
Yeah.
Skrulls, you might be like, well, like, he can't be a Skrull. But I'm like, I don't know. I think they're just on every side of this thing, all over the place. There's a million of them, like, all over the scene. So I think that scene with Fury, you could read it a number of ways, but what happens at the end of this? Fury is disempowered, and that is what the Skrulls want. And so I think they have to make a character we've known for a while
Yeah.
be a Skrull. And Rhodey is, I think, a really good candidate for that. And I talked about this on the Ringerverse, the other podcast I do, but for a bunch of different reasons, but one of them being Rhodey has no superpowers, right? And so there's going to be this whole plot, it seems, as is indicated in this episode, of the Skrulls trying to like pursue their own superpowers so they can imitate the Avengers, or at least fight the Avengers if they need to. But right now a Skrull can pretend to be Rhodey and put the suit on and not have to have any superpowers in order to pretend to be an Avenger at this point. So yeah,
Mhm.
I'm like, I'm ready to be wrong. I'm often wrong, but like I'm like 92% in on Rhodey's.
Well,
Yeah. Go ahead,
it,
Dave.
Yeah.
it's also an opportunity to fix Rhodey's character. Like, it's not the most developed character. He's in a lot of key situations a lot of the time and does what we need him to do, which is great. Don Cheadle is great as him, given very limited actual character development. How good of an arc is it if at the end of this they find the real Rhodey who doesn't know Tony Stark has died? Then all
Oh
of a
my god.
sudden, it's like this Rhodey that's been really close to the government, even as the government's doing horrible things, makes a lot more sense. And it leads us into something like Armor Wars, where there are actually character-based stakes in Rhodey that isn't just, I'm, tied to the government and therefore the Stark technology is my problem. If he wakes up and he's like, I lost my best friend and he sacrificed, to save the entire world, and he has to wake up and deal with that, that's a great starting point for whatever's next for Rhodey. So I think, like, even though him being a Skrull would be huge, because that character has been around since the first Iron Man, so it's one of our longest standing MCU characters. It's also a great place to pivot and sort of refocus on Rhodey as his own individual character instead of like a sidekick or a government attaché. So I would love it, and I think it makes just complete story sense if that's where we're going.
So I floated because you shared that theory with me last week, Dave, and I floated it to Mallory in the pod last week. She had a smart rebuttal to just the part about like not knowing that Tony Stark is dead, because like we all still agree that we think that Rhodey is a Skrull. The question is when, right?
Yes.
Mhm.
What she pointed out is that in Endgame, when Tony is dying, there's only 3 people with him, and one of them's Rhodey. And she's like, I just will have a real hard time if like it's Pepper and Peter and a Skrull with Tony Stark when he died. Like
Well,
that
we
would be a
gotta.
problem,
You have
you
to
know?
extend a little bit onto what being a scroll for in human form for that long means, and if they are using the brain fracking method on him, then you have a scroll personality that's completely in the back seat, in the sunken place, if you will, to this Rhodey personality. That scroll could care as much for Tony Stark as Rhodey did if he's been around for like 5 years. If the first Rhodey saw Tony Stark being like, "I'm Iron Man," and then got to put on the Iron Patriot suit once and then got swapped out somewhere, like that leaves room for like I'm hesitant to treat any Skrull as just alien bad guy, because they're really trying to do the work to say like this is a culture that has different opinions inside of it, and Gravik's out there killing his own operatives, so like obviously they're antagonists within Skrulls. I think there's a lot more. I guess it's coming from like the comics where you can't like actually kill a character, but you can put it through like a whole
Yeah.
bunch of cycles. This is like the Jarvis is a Skrull of the MCU, would be Rhodey's been a Skrull for a period of time.
That's interesting. I mean, I would even give word or clearance to the idea that it's possible that maybe Rhodes was taken over after Endgame, mainly because in the way that they characterize a lot of the MCU series in the Disney Plus shows and even the movies to a degree, is that they are all the heroes are trying to find their way. All the people are trying to find their way after the blip. So, I mean, it could be possible, especially with all of these. I mean, you almost wonder in terms of the Squirrel Council, when did these assimilations happen? We don't really know, and I think that's the best part, because now it has the wheel. It makes my wheels turn and think like, you mentioned Rhodes and everybody involved in the Squirrel Council. What happens with that? Will there be another character that we hold near and dear that we might see in some type of cameo or something like that? Thanks. You made me go down the rabbit hole. And
Now,
who do you trust? Go
I have
ahead,
an
Jake.
important question though. What if, because you mentioned like, oh, the Skrull is the reason why he's so close to the government. What if the real Rhodes wakes up and he's more conservative? I mean, that's that's the way you could go.
A right-wing Armor Wars would be a choice, but I would show up.
I'm mostly saying that because AC, I want you to talk a little bit. You don't have to go as detailed as you did on the Discord, but I want you to talk a little bit about what you're feeling about, but how you been feeling about Rhodes with what some of the stuff he's been doing in this scene.
There's a lot of respectability politics when it comes to Mr. Rhodes, as far as his speak is concerned, and this isn't the first time that he's kind of alluded to his political leanings on that. And when Fury gives the help a brother out situation, which again, that really kind of gets to it, because that conversation, more so than anything else, especially for if you gauge the black people who watched this show, who watched that episode and saw that conversation, a lot of people were taken aback because, oh, they're really doing this in terms of having this conversation, as far as when Fury brings up the mediocre men of the world like Alexander Pierce running things and taking the power and being able to have the power, and then Rhodes throwing it back in Fury's face. And this is one of the few instances where when Rhodes says that you're just as mediocre as him, at this point, it's not difficult to feel as the person watching it like, to a degree, yeah, kinda, because it seems like you don't know what's going on either. So I think that's that part of it, Jake. When you talk about Rhodes is a lot of fun, but I think it's fair. It's fair to question everything, and I think the design of the series is for you to literally question everything, not just the Skrulls, but does Fury know what he's doing? And I think that's a fair point. There's a fair point to make there. But we're talking a lot about Skrulls, and we mentioned the Squirrel Council, and Gravik seems like one thing that I like about the portrayal of Gravik so far is that it's a very get shit done type of person. There's not really a lot of hesitancy. There's a lot of irresolute ideals. And that scene where he's talking to the rest of the Squirrel Council and he goes war and then pounds the table, I was like, whoo, 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 whoo.
Yeah.
Mr. Kingsley.
Or
He's
just
bringing.
lifting a gentleman up and gently placing him on a meat hook and
Oh my
killing him.
God.
Yeah.
There's some great Gravik
Yeah.
in this episode. That guy's not going to take any prisoners.
But what I wanted
Yeah.
to ask you actually about your washed agenda because
Yeah, sure.
what I love about both Gaia and Gravik is they look so tired. Like Gravik has a lot in him, but they look like when they're driving around, they're just like, I'm like, have
He's
you
just
guys had
lying
enough
back in the
coffee
car.
today? Yeah, he's just like he's like half asleep, right? And she's just like Amelia Clark, absolutely gorgeous woman, has like these bags under her eyes. So I'm like, I guess it's not entirely comfortable to live in a nuclear silo or wherever it is they're living. Like they're stretched and they're stressed.
No,
These
they're living
revolutionaries.
they're living double no, they're living not double lives. In some ways they're living triple lives because of the way that Gaia is searching. She's curious about the what she finds on the screen, the experimenting that's going on with the potential super scroll situation that we have. Well, we see Cull Obsidian, we see Groot, we see I think was it a frost giant on the screen as well. And the extremist formula, all of that is being considered there. So she's not only a Skrull pretending to be a human, she's also spying on somebody who could potentially kill her. And she has her father, Talos, on the other side of that as well, with her mother also being dead. So there's so much going on with that character that I'm looking forward to see being portrayed. But then when you talk about Gravik, yeah, when the way that he talks about dogs being better than humans in some ways, and kind of the way that he's about that life, even with being weird, it is tiring to be him in a way that you see it so far because it's this as Rhodes mentions to Fury, being uncompromising in his beliefs. And that is seeing Gravik and seeing Kingsley portray that has been so much fun to see, even though we haven't gotten like a lot of it. But the more that we do, it intrigues me more to see where that character goes. Jake, how did you feel about what you saw with Kingsley's performance? Because it'll get lost in a lot of the stuff that we talk about here because there was so many good performances all over the place. But I thought Kingsley in particular stood out pretty well.
Yes, I think that he is really his performance is calibrated to how he doesn't have a ton of big monologues or screen time because that's just not what he does. I think that he is like the way you talk about him being tired. I think the thing that he's tired of is that he is one of you get the impression based on the fact that Skrulls have a longer lifespan that he's probably one of the younger Skrulls that's there, and he's grown up exclusively in this world where like he has no real memory. He doesn't have a lot of memories of a good time to be a Skrull, and I think that he has the attitude that a lot of young radical people who grow up in a bad situation do, where it's just like, I'm tired of these adults telling me that compromise and waiting is the way to go. Why can't we just take things for our own? And so like he doesn't need to go on a villainous monologue to explain himself. You know, you kind of just get it. And I think that he immediately you immediately get the idea that he will kill literally anyone, and like that's an obvious thing to say about a villain. But I think in in this day and age where, and I know I've complained about this before, where everyone wants villains to be in shades of gray, that they think that that means that like the villains can't be as bad. But it's like, no, he is a really bad guy and that he will kill a lot of people. But the thing that's gray about him is that like you understand where he's coming from. So like I simultaneously think that if the moment he finds out that like Guy is doing something bad, he'll shoot her in the head. But that doesn't mean that like he hasn't been wronged a lot. And I think that he plays the pain of it so well. He doesn't. I think it's easy for a character who is quick to kill people, who is violent, to come off as insane. And at no point do you think this guy's insane. You think that he just has a very different worldview than you do. But he feels in control. Like the moment they got the guy out of the meat locker, you knew damn well he was getting two in the head. Well, the moment they got somewhere isolated, like that type of thing is, I think, when you're in this type of story where everyone's kind of morally gray, where everyone's done bad things, I think it's helpful to have a person who kind of is not, who you pretty clearly can say, like, this dude takes no prisoners in a bad way.
Yes, I would tend to agree with that, and I think that bitterness, that bitterness is like it comes off him, like it's this aura to a degree that you see from him. So I'm I'm excited for more than anything else. Joanne, I wanted to ask you about this whole Super Scroll thing, and
Yeah.
we're starting to see the experiments and everything going on with that. It's wow. I'm curious to see it. I'm guessing that obviously we saw briefly in one of the TV spots that Gravik clearly gets the powers. I wonder who else will. That's a question that I'm intrigued about. How about you?
Oh, you mean like his second in command or
Yeah, or
Gaia or
maybe
something like
even
that?
perhaps somebody like Gaia at some
Yeah,
point if she's investigating
it
it
would be
herself.
it would be extremely fun to see 2 foot tall Amelia Clark like punch someone through a wall or something like that. But like,
Extremely fun.
yeah, extremely fun. But yeah, super to Dave's point, super soldier serum. When has that ever gone wrong in a in a Marvel story? Like here we are back again with probably something in a vial that's going to be injected into someone, and we'll see how it goes. I I yeah, who's gonna be super powered? I feel like they've haven't done a tremendous job of making us care about too many scrolls at the camp other than Gravik and Gaia.
Yeah.
Not even his second in command who like knows more than Gaia does. Like,
He
do
just makes
I really
faces.
care
A
about?
lot of
Yeah.
faces. A lot of
Yeah,
pain
and
faces.
and he's just someone that like she can follow around and eavesdrop on and stuff like that. So, but yeah, the Super Scroll stuff is kind of interesting, but it's much more MCU than it is the espionage angle, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And I'm even more interested, I'm so much more intrigued by what's going on with Nick Fury's wife. You know what I mean? Like or who else will reveal themselves to be a scroll, and you know, is it also the president of the, is it Dermot Mulroney? Is it this? Is it that? The other thing. And then also something that we were talking about last week on the pod that like I would really love to see if Rhodey is a scroll. I really hope before the end of the series we get to see like the real Rhodey like try to escape his current circumstances, or you know what I mean? Like I would like to
Yeah.
spend time with real Rhodey, or maybe that's just what Armor Wars is going to be. To Dave's point, we'll see.
Oh no, it'll be interesting for sure. Now on the you mentioned Fury's wife. Now Dave, out of curiosity yourself, when you see that situation, it's the classic meme. Does he know?
Yeah. Does he know? Yeah, I think he does. There's something about it deepens at the very least it deepens him knowing deepens the conflict, because there's a difference if Nick Fury and Carol Danvers promise a home planet. Carol Danvers leaves for space, and Nick Fury's like, "Well, let's build up Shield around this Hydra shell that's like vaguely here." Versus a Nick Fury that like has genuine reasons because he's married into this other population. It makes him much more conflicted, I think, if he knows, especially giving the speech to Talos earlier on the train, where he's like, "We don't have room for this other species, my wife." It adds a whole different level to it, and to why he'd want to keep her safe. Or what happened to sort of separate her involvement from Nick Fury's super spy? Like, has she been coming up to Saber to do like weekly visits or something, or did he abandon his
Conjugals?
wife?
Are there conjugals
Yeah,
on Saber?
Were
Is
they
that your
playing
question?
doctor?
Okay.
Perhaps?
yeah, playing some doctor. Yeah, I think it's actually cooler if he does know, but I see why they ended the episode the way he did, because now we get to talk about if he knows for a week before I'm sure it starts episode 3 with some clarity, or at least include it in the beginning. But I think it's Fury Fury might not be as behind the ball as he appears.
Mm-hmm.
He just might be slightly further ahead than even we're thinking because he's more personally invested in it. So like he knows about this. There's still a big question mark about if how Gravik was involved with the death of Talos's wife, Gaia's mother. I assume we're going to get more about that to see that. But also like this idea that maybe he and Gravik and his wife had a little family unit, and it's Gravik's not just a Skrull warrior; he's Nick Fury Jr. essentially, and so
Yeah.
we have this sort of familial spy versus spy, except one's willing to cross lines that the other one apparently hasn't been.
Yeah,
And I think
Joanna, before you go, I just wanted to ask you because it's the same thing, but do you think that does it change anything for you to say if it's possible that Fury doesn't know? I was listening to the Midnight Boys, and it seemed like they had a different view on this as far as that's concerned, and they thought that if Fury didn't know, that would not be something that was great for him and just the overall look at the series. How about you? Let's say he didn't know.
yeah. Well, the question is like, has she there are flavors of he didn't know. Has
Right.
this person always been a Skrull, or did he marry a human person and they are now like in a fracking pod somewhere dead, being impersonated by a Skrull? I agree with Dave. I think it's more interesting if he knows, but I can see the deep tragedy. Like he's trying to hold on to some semblance of like a pro Skrull sentiment because that is something that he has had since the 90s, but like if he finds out that in his very home has been invaded, that's sort of a different thing. So like I would prefer Dave's version. I could see that they could make some meat out of the other version, but I think to go back to that Rhodey to the Rhodey Fury conversation where he's talking about what connects us, right? Like we're both black men, like let's talk about the things that connect us. And I think that idea of like who is us and who is them is one of the more interesting things that the series can explore. At what point is the Skrull still other? How long does Talos have to wear Ben Mendelsohn's face and like be your ally for him to be an us? Or is he always going to be a them? Or for Talos, when his literal daughter is on the opposite side of a conflict, like are they a them? Are they a father-daughter unit? Or are they forever separated by ideology on this particular thing? So I think to take that theme, which is just going to echo through all these relationships and bring it right into the home of like are we an us, a married couple, or are you a them? And that's pretty fascinating to me.
Interesting. And how about you, Jake? What did you think of the whole does
So
he know or not?
I think he knows because it's more interesting, and because I feel like if you're gonna do the he doesn't know, I feel like introducing the wife character just to do that is like a hat on a hat of ideas. Like you, because if Nick Fury's wife was introduced 4 years ago, that would be one thing. But I think to have the surprise of, oh my god, Nick Fury has a wife, and then like if 2 episodes later it's the rug is pulled, then I'm kind of like, well, I didn't know we had a wife until 2 episodes ago, so this is only so much of a rug pull. But and I also think that like I don't know if this actually matters, but they did mention earlier in the series that wearing basically your human face full time makes you harder to detect. And so I almost think that the fact that we first see her as a Skrull implies to me that she's clearly not that worried about passing muster. That I might just be reading too much into that. Small one. The line that they threw in clearly just because Ben Mendelsohn and Amelia Clark didn't want to spend every day in the makeup chair for 5 hours.
Right.
But and so like, and I also think that like Nick Fury is I think that he is a man of contradictions in a way that it would make more sense to me if he were to be married to a Skrull. Now, what does it say that he's married to a Skrull and he asks her to put her human face on at home? That is a complicated question that I don't even want to touch. I don't even want to pretend that's a metaphor for something. But like that is a very interesting. But genuinely, that is a thing that I don't know if they would ever want to explore. But like, if he does know, then like that's kind of shitty for her. That every time her husband comes home, she has to pretend to be a thing she's not. I don't know. That was a thing that I thought about if with the assumption that he knows.
Right.
But yeah, I think that was a good way to end the episode, especially because I feel like you know, we know stuff about Nick Fury, but we really don't know a lot about Nick Fury. He's kind of an unknowable guy, and like it's not really. It kind of makes sense that he has something to go back to, because it's not like, that you can imagine him in the 90s. He's already a pretty old guy, and I think you can imagine him not ever thinking he'd settle down, but then in the process of trying to rehome the scrolls, he finds someone, etc., etc. And so, like, I like that for him, and I think it adds another thing for him to lose. Not that I think he will lose it, but it adds another bit of, like, tethering to the ground, because at the moment he's kind of unmoored.
Yes, I would agree with that on that statement. But I would be remiss if I didn't get to mention Olivia Coleman's performance in this episode. You want to talk about the efficiency levels? Just briefly, just being on screen and just killing it.
Yeah.
My goodness gracious. Dave, I'll start with you. That interrogation scene, as she's casually just not only torturing this guy, reading the dude who she gives the phone to and telling him to make yourself scarce, like all that stuff. What did you think of that? Because it was one of those things where you have all of these performances going around in this episode, and she just casually just walks in, and if in basketball terms, she just a casual 30 and 20 minutes of screen time, so 20 minutes on the court. It's just incredible stuff.
Yeah, we're really back to British TV comedy Olivia Coleman, and
Yep.
I love it. Yeah, I think there's a real power in realizing you have like that scene right in a television, an espionage television show. Like you get sort of the torture scene where we're on your side technically because we don't want the scrolls to blow everything up, but also like you immediately go to cutting a guy's finger off and giving him boiling blood. So it's a real I think smart decision for her to play it as light and as smiley Olivia Coleman as she does, because it distracts from the fact that she's uh the new Nick Fury in terms of person who has it all together. She walks in, she knows what she's going to do. She moves all the other guys out so they could buy her some time to open the escape hatch, which she asks about. Like she knows how all this is going to go down the second she walks in there, and walks in with that confidence. And so playing it that confidently and then never letting that performance slip, so that even like she looks a little perturbed that the escape hatch is maybe too small, so she has to hunch over. Like I think is just a brilliant decision. The acting on the show is what's bringing me to the table every week, and then sort of the mysteries of it are sort of secondary to maybe letting me hang on a cliffhanger. But I just want to see these people do stuff like Olivia Coleman torturing a person, or Sam Jackson just having the perfect monologue for every morally comprehensible situation. I'm really enjoying it.
Yes, and Joanna. So
Mhm.
Sonia may not have a washed agenda, but she does have an agenda. What do you think it
Yeah.
is?
Well, I think what they mentioned in episode 1 is that she would do scorched earth on the scrolls, like that she is her agenda differs from Fury and Talos in that she's like any scroll is an enemy, right? And Fury and Talos are trying to thread the needle a bit more and be like, listen, there are scrolls that are allies, scrolls like deserve a home, all this sort of stuff like that. And I think her agenda is we've been invaded, these are all enemies, these are all others, eliminate them. So it becomes like a race against her to get the information, because she will just decimate everyone. I think is like where she is on the spectrum of scroll acceptance. And I love in the spy genre, something you guys were talking about last week, is in the wash agenda umbrella is the idea of like this isn't the war you used to fight or whatever. And what I love even more is in the espionage genre is two spies who have gone through this before and maybe been on opposite sides or maybe been on the same side, but like they've known each other longer than the wars that they fought, you know what I mean? And so their relationship is just something else. And so I loved the Fury and Sonya scene in episode 1, and I love that she's here as this other shadowy operative on the board. And like, yeah, her ability to know that she would need an escape hatch, and just a sense she has, and her like almost Dolores Umbridge-esque like approach to torture, except like it's fantastic to watch. Coleman is just
Yeah. Oh my
crushing
goodness. Yeah, she's ahead of the curve. And Jake, I know you want to give flowers, so go ahead, give your flowers.
I think the thing is, because I think that a lot of times since I do the show, a lot of people will, interrogate me about what makes the MCU not bad, and I don't often have an answer. But the thing about it that I always think separates it from a lot of the franchise stuff is that, and I'm sure you guys know because you did a book on it, but it really feels like more than almost any other franchise, it just lets actors have scenes like this that they can just kind of go big and have fun. And like Olivia Coleman, I think, is someone that a lot of American audiences might mistake in thinking that she's a deeply serious person, and she's really not at all, which is what makes her delightful. And because I said last week that I'm glad we're getting fun Olivia Coleman. And yeah, I'm also just a sucker for a gleeful torture scene. It's a morally horrible thing about me, but the more violent someone is being, if they're happy about it, I always will enjoy it, and then be like, I shouldn't have enjoyed it that much.
Sounds like an old Jack Bauer fan over there.
No, because Jack Bauer is not very gleeful about it. He feels like that's what I'm not thinking of.
Shout out to 24 though. No, Dave, that's my corner. Shout out to
24.
But so I think that like making her the opposition of, not like the inverse of Nick Fury, where like I suspect that by the end she'll probably get some type of comeuppance for this, but she seems to be thinking that she's fully in control of the situation, whereas Nick Fury doesn't feel like he's at all. And so I think that giving her even just small amounts of screen time to like show the difference between where Nick Fury really has not made any progress on anything. He's only lost stuff, whereas she kind of feels like she's making moves, doing stuff. But yeah, I just was great. Yeah, really just, I think that anything about this show that I have issues with, it really is just a testament to the power of Marvel, that there's a show that you can say like, oh my god, there's a show where Samuel L. Jackson, Don Cheadle, Olivia Coleman, and Ben Mendelsohn are all actually like giving capital A acting performances on. Like that's a special thing no matter what. And so yeah, I just wanted to throw Mendelsohn in there to give him his flowers. One of my goals in life is to get to a place where I can call him Mendo, because it feels like everyone who works with him calls him that, and that would mean a lot if I could do that. So,
amazing. Okay.
I do because I do want to ask Dave and Joanna about their book coming in October. But before we do that, I do want to go around the room and ask, what are we looking forward to the most in the next episode or for the season? Just curious, Joanna. I'll start with you. Is there any particular thing that you're looking forward to finding out or seeing?
Yeah, I'm going into this, like there's so many great actors in the show, but I am a huge Kingsley Ben-Adir fan. And so I think that like we got some good Gravik in this episode, but I can't wait to see him interact on a more sustained basis with Nick. That's my hope, to see that like you raised me sort of resentment directly from him. Also, something that they engaged with a bit in episode 1 that I'm curious to see how it pans out is like, what kind of leader is he? What kind of like because his second in command is like, you're the mission. He's like, I'm nothing. I'm not the mission. The mission is this bigger thing. And so when you think about these kinds of leaders of these uprising, it's like a cult of personality almost with Gravik. Like he just commands that whole Squirrel Council room, and he wasn't even invited to the meeting, and then he's like in charge of everyone. Okay, you know what I mean? And so like I'm just fascinated by Gravik, and I know that Kingsley Ben-Adir is capable of so much. So that's what I have my eye on for sure.
Yes. And Dave, how about you?
Similarly, I want the parent showdown. I want Fury, Gravik, Talos, Gaia 4-way showdown where everybody realizes nobody knows who is on anybody's team, because it's just about these personal issues between these 4 characters. I know that a Marvel series has an expectation to sort of go big at the end. I would love it if this one did the inverse and went really small.
Mm-hmm.
Your lips to God's ears.
Yeah, I think it'd be great.
Yeah.
Interesting. And how about you, Jake?
I want them to. I want to see, because I think because Joanna was talking about she's not that interested in the superpower school thing, which I actually agree with, because I think the thing that they introduced in the first episode, which they kind of dropped, is I think the idea of them that the Skrulls are immune to radiation, therefore meaning if humanity destroyed itself in a nuclear holocaust, they could just live there. I almost wish they didn't. I don't need the superpower Skrull things. I just wish they tried to start, like, if the whole thing was just about them trying to start World War III, I think that'd be very interesting. And so what I hope we have, and I'm looking forward to, is high stakes political. Is there going to be a scene in a situation room where one country might need to nuke another, and one of the people in the room is like, is there going to be a Cuban Missile Crisis, but one of the people involved is a Skrull, like that type of thing. I mean, that's why espionage stuff around the 60s is always so interesting, because it's the tension's so high. And so, like, not just because I'm always happy to see more Dermot Mulroney. Shouts to him, by the way, in Solidarity, one of the realists. I want to see, like, what is it like if there is a big White House scene where someone is like, wait, I'm a Skrull, don't send that nuke, or send that nuke, this, that, the other. Because the stakes there, I mean, like, I think that, the stakes of when nuclear weapons are involved is the highest stakes we can have as people. And so, like, I think that if they just leave that as a sideline in episode 1 and don't actually come back to it, I think that's a huge missed opportunity, because what's the point of introducing the president as a character and implying that showing that the prime minister of the UK is a Skrull if you're not going to have actual wars or threats of wars between countries?
Are you shouting at Dermot Mulroney for walking off the View? Is that what you're shouting at?
Yes, and also because he's apparently been on the picket line the whole time. I mean, just in terms of actors, he's been like one of the most vocal. AC can tell you, I've been keeping track of anytime an actor is. I'll always post it in our Discord, because I'm, you see who does and you see who doesn't.
Yeah.
Yes, that definitely matters. I think for me, whatever the consequences for Fury of this event, this series, intrigues me, because clearly they've started. He's lost Maria Hill. He's at an impasse with Talos so far. How do those two kind of work their relationship back to standing, and how he deals with Gravik? Like, all of that considered, where does this end up for Fury in terms of how he not only sees the world, and also the power that he talked about having? It seemed like that was something that was important to him. What is it like if he loses that? How does he react? And seeing the personal story of Nick Fury is something that intrigues me overall, because whether he wins or loses, clearly he's going to be in the Marvels. We're going to see him in there. What are those consequences? And are they significant enough that it may affect him? Or maybe it's an instance where it does affect him and he's still yet to not even know about it after this series, because of the way that I see Secret Invasion, and we talked about it, me and Jake, before the series started, is that the after effects of the invasion, the stuff that, tell me something I don't know. What is he not going to know after this series? Is that intrigues me as well. So far so good. First 2 episodes. It should be interesting to see how it goes going forward. Now, before we go, I do want to ask you guys, because not only Joanna and Dave and Gavin Edwards, they wrote a book that's coming out in October, MCU, The Reign of Marvel Studios. Writing a book during a pandemic about one of the biggest film franchise out there seems like a lot. Joanna, I'll start with you. What was this process like? How did it come together? I guess you could start there.
Yeah, we started this pre-pandemic. We started this in 2019, right around when Endgame, right after Endgame had dropped, basically, and Marvel was like unquestionably the biggest thing in the world, pop culture wise. And the book came to us, like a publisher came to us asking for like a history of Marvel Studios, and I had written a Marvel cover story for Vanity Fair, and so they're like, "Hey, Joanna, seems like you like these comic book movies. Do you want to write a book about it?" And so it changed and developed over the many years that we worked on it, and the pandemic both slowed it down and sped it up at the same time, because like the pandemic slows everything down, but at the same time, like a lot of us had a lot of time, including the people that we were interviewing. So like there were a lot of industry professionals who were just stuck at home and were like, yes, sure, we'll talk to you for hours at a time about Marvel Studios. So that was in a way very helpful for us. But I appreciate how much time it took us to put this book together. Dave may not, but I appreciate how much time it took us to put this book together, because it means that while we were making it, the narrative of Marvel changed so much between 2019 and October 2023 when this is going to come out. And so what started as a book about the biggest thing in the world has now become a book about, yes, this was the biggest thing in the world. Right now it's experiencing something, the cracks are showing
Yeah.
in this whole machine. I think everyone agree, even Marvel's biggest fans I think would agree that like the consistency isn't as high as it used to be. So that affords us the opportunity to say what happened, or what was working so well about it before that is not working quite as well now. Like most of the book is still just like the history of it working well. But when you get to the end and you get to look back, you're like, okay, they built this unprecedented thing. We got to talk to everyone about how they built it. We got to celebrate the movies that Dave and Gavin and I all love. And then we get to sit and reflect and say, okay, what's changed? Or what was the phrase we like to talk about is like unscalable. When they start to make more and more and more TV, more movies, etc. What is what can you not scale up? And part of the answer to that is like Kevin Feige is one man, and he is so crucial to the success of all of this. And unlike cloning technology in the Marvel universe, you can't clone Kevin Feige. So like, what are you gonna do? So it was fun and really challenging, and we kind of had to battle a giant studio along the way in order to do it, and we came out the other side. So that's the story.
No, shout out to y'all. Jake, did you have anything? I had more, but
Yeah,
did you have
I mean,
anything?
I think that, and this is a not relatively specific question, but I think that like, going back to when people ask me to defend the MCU, the thing I always will say is like I point to a lot of the other any other time someone tried to do a shared universe franchise, it's been a problem. And I'm curious, like what what do you think it is that has prevented the MCU from ever having something like The Flash, where like it's like not just a disaster in the box office, but like I think I noticed about the MCU is that obviously there are behind the scenes issues or what have you, but like for a franchise as big as it is, it really feels like there hasn't been the big like movie that has a huge issue. And now I think there are some cracks showing, but I'm just curious, what is it about? Is it just Kevin Feige? Or like how do they make a movie like Endgame where there's clearly so many egos involved, and at the very least it never becomes an issue, and there's never email leaks about this, that, or the other. Am I crazy? I think that that's a different thing about Marvel, because it feels like every other time there's a failure, there's some type of like reckoning of like, well, this person done this, and this person did this, and this person did that.
I mean, I think what we found is it's Marvel. A lot of the internal battles that also lead to its successes is about who has singular control over something. So they have, Kevin Feige at the top. He's apparently like a vibe guy, so he'll just meet with like directors and writers that he likes, and then when he's able to pair them with a project and a creative producer. They have a bunch of producers below the Kevin Feige level, but still pretty high up, that will stay with the project from conception all the way through editing. That allows for a certain degree of quality control, especially if you're only doing like 2 or 3 movies a year. That's very controllable in terms of making sure everything lines up. And because these people stay on it for the most part, you have your occasional Edgar Wright or Joss Whedon situations where the process breaks them and they have to step away. But for the most part, it's pretty consistent. If there are problems, they're going to write out those problems with the same creatives. So you don't have something that happened with The Flash, which is 3 generations of WB executives messing with it on their way out. That doesn't happen. The Marvel machine, for the most part, especially in phase 3 and phase 4, seems to be a little bit more like a family. I don't know if that's based on emotion or just based on the fact that, like, if you get a Marvel job and you do well, they're going to invite you back for something else, and that's consistent work. Which, you know, sometimes it could hold people like VFX houses hostage, but for actual creatives, like, isn't it nice that Daniel Destin Cretton did a Shang-Chi, and now they're like having him come back for an Avengers movie.
Yeah.
There's a place to build there if you get along within the system.
Mhm.
So I think it's just a matter of, there's not a question about who's in control. You know, if there's a DC leak, you're like, nobody's making jokes that David Zaslav's going to break down your door. But every MCU leak, there's a little meme about Kevin Feige, you know, sending assassins to you. So they have a degree of control over the creative process, which did make it difficult for Joanna and I to peer into it, but I think we managed to crack enough of it.
And I think what was fun for us to track, because it is loosely chronological, this book, I think it was fun for us to crack was sort of like when they figured out that system, when they got everything under control, because it certainly like wasn't the case from the beginning. I think the closest thing most people would agree to the reception of the Flash is the Incredible Hulk, right? Like that is like largely considered an unsuccessful situation, and that was a lot of different creative people trying to battle for control over that particular property. And we talked to someone who both worked on that film and then worked on Endgame, who talked about this idea of the invention of the no assholes policy at Marvel, where it's just sort of like after that experience, they're like, we're hiring people, you know, and like, you know, a few assholes might have snuck in here and there, but like, they're like, we're hiring people who are not going to, you know, have an ego big enough that it's a problem. Or if there's someone with an ego big enough that it's a problem, the payoff is enough that we like are willing to placate it. And I think that, I think like the Edgar Wright situation is so interesting in that regard, because Edgar Wright and Ant-Man was a project that they had from the beginning, and it was just delayed for a bunch of different reasons. And by the time the green light comes along for Edgar Wright to make Ant-Man, it's a different studio than the one he signed on to from the beginning, where it was a little bit more like, you're the filmmaker, Jon Favreau, go make an independent movie, and it happens to be Iron Man. By the time they're doing Ant-Man with Edgar Wright, they're like, no, it's a tapestry, it's a sandbox, and you have to play well with other people. And Edgar Wright's like, that's not really the movie that I signed up to do or I'm interested in doing, you know. And it doesn't make Edgar Wright an asshole, and it doesn't necessarily make Marvel like an asshole. It's just sort of like a different environment. And after that, and this is something that Feige himself told me, after that, it was just sort of like everyone who signed on understood that they were signing on to be part of a larger thing. And so then you don't have those same problems, because they're like, oh, I get it. I'm not just telling my story. I'm telling a chapter in a larger book that they're trying to write, you know?
Yes, I that a thing that I joke about a lot is that because I kind of straddle both the MCU stuff, and I also follow a lot of film Twitter and stuff like that. And it is funny in some ways to see the way that some people who are really into movies, I think, are smarter about the stuff than me, will like talk about actors and writers as if they're being like held at gunpoint to do Marvel stuff. It's like, no, like they're getting paid a lot, and especially with actors, like it generally seems like they have a good time. Like I get it. I wish Mark Ruffalo did more indie dramas, but I think he probably likes playing the Hulk and likes the paychecks. But yeah, that is yeah, I think that is just notable, because I think the Flash is microcosm, but like, think about how much I know way too much about bad stuff that happened in the DCU. I shouldn't know all of these bad things that happened.
Yeah.
Anyway, AC, I think you have more questions though.
Yes, I do. I like the minutia as far as the preparing of something like this undertaking that you guys did. What was the most interesting part of putting this together? Dave, I'll start with you, but both of you can answer.
The most interesting from like a Marvel aspect?
No, interesting from you from a writing perspective.
Oh yeah, this is my first go at it. So I would do these things called like vomit drafts, which is I had like a weekly column about Marvel on a now defunct site called Latino Review for a long time. From like I believe we started like right after Hulk, and then I think I went through like 2014. So I'd always been on the fan side of it, and like hearing things and like remembering parts of the coverage. So when it sat down to sort of collect these into a history, I would make these vomit drafts just of like, here's what we know, and then I would throw in some Joanna interview quotes, and it was great. And it was like, I was so concerned with trying to get the flow right that eventually when we brought in Gavin, who's king of the flow, and he helped us get the flow right.
Yeah.
He was like, all right, time for the endnotes. And I was like, wait, what? And so there was a very early version of this book that I had to spend 2 weeks going through, redoing all of the research I did to get it to the first place. And if you want to talk about minutia, I will never do that again. All my books have stickies now. I have a notebook for when I'm reading about things that I'm reading, so I know how to get back to them. And that's not super marvelly, but definitely something that first-time authors should keep in mind, especially if you're doing nonfiction. Keep a running list of your sources all the time. You would much rather cut those down after not needing them than have what happened to me, which is like, well, where are the endnotes? I'm like, haha, yes, of course. Oh my god.
And how about you, Joanna?
Yeah, I think one of the most fascinating things for us, outside of everything we learned about Marvel, which like we went in knowing a lot and we learned a lot as well, is discovering our own process. Like as Dave just alluded to, that like I did, Dave did the lion's share of our research. I did all the interviews. Like Gavin puts together the flow, and then you have 3 different people's agendas or versions of the story or opinions on something that happened that you have to like go, so we would have constant Zoom call conversations where we would sort of like wrestle back and forth, and it's sort of like, okay, I'll concede this, you concede this, like that sort of stuff. So like when you see multiple author names on something, I personally am always curious how it went, and I think eventually we settled into this like pretty incredible flow. But trying to figure out, it was a project that started just Dave and Joanna. Dave and Joanna have known each other for years, and then when we realized we needed help with the flow, bringing Gavin in, who didn't know us, like that could have gone disastrously, but it went really well at the end of the day. But it was just always interesting to me to have those conversations, and it was good because anyone knows this. When you have an idea about something and someone comes in and like challenges you about it, it just forces you to shore up your side of the argument with like more and more data or a better constructed argument. So when either Dave or Gavin would like challenge me on something, sometimes my side would just evaporate into the wind like dust, and sometimes I was able to like construct a wall strong enough that I could be like, no, we're holding firm on this. And that was really fun,
Dave, what's your problem with Jeff Loeb? Some things are coming through on this chapter. And I'd be like, all right.
Oh man, that's great. Joanna, is Kevin Feige as interesting to talk to as we would think that he is?
I think he's so fascinating because he is like the Kevin Feige that you see in any interview or whatever. That's just like who he is all the time, by all accounts. Anyone we ever talk to, he is extremely genial, extremely kind. Will remember everyone and every detail of everything that he ever talked to you about. Like, but the sort of contradiction inside of Kevin Feige is like, you don't get to the top of the biggest studio in the land by being a nice guy, right? So what else is going on there? And what's true is that he is just brilliant beyond measure, like emotional intelligence, all this sort of stuff like that. So he's the king of sort of staying quiet, staying low, staying friends with everyone while working things into the way that he wants them to be. There's a lot of people we talk to about the early days of Marvel, like how he worked himself up the ranks, and it's just sort of like he was just a quiet guy. He was always there, he was always quiet, always nice, always helpful, always had great ideas, and it's just sort of like and there are sort of contentious splits that happened in the beginning of the formation of Marvel Studios, but both sides of that split still love Kevin Feige. So it's like, how did he do that? So when you sit down, as I got to talk to him for like multiple hours in his office, etc., like it's he's nice and he's kind and he's all this sort of stuff, but like you see that the wheels are turning, and he's gonna make sure to only tell you exactly what he wants to tell you and nothing more. And yeah, it's a little intimidating being around someone that smart. He's so smart.
There's a great quote in the book from Dan Harmon where he's like, you can't fight Kevin Feige in the street because he would just be standing there being like, oh, I love that you're fighting me right now. This is so great. And it's like, that's sort of the feeling. It's like, it's hard to counteract somebody who genuinely loves movies, has an amazing track record for being right, and then also isn't the type of person who's going to come in and yell at you if you do something wrong. He's going to address the problem in a very calm way. And so it's hard to have conflict with that type of person.
There are only like a few instances that we could probably count on one hand where it's like Kevin Feige lost his temper, or Kevin Feige like
and a bunch
let
of them were
people
at Ike
know.
Perlmutter, which makes a whole bunch of sense
Yeah.
if you know
Yeah.
anything about
I mean,
Marvel.
well, hell yeah. We endorse that in this podcast. I don't want to speak for AC, but yelling
Yeah,
at
I
Ike Perlmutter is always okay. Yeah, and I think the thing is, and you kind of alluded to it, I think that the thing that, because, you know, when we started this podcast, the main thing was that Anthony grew up with comic books and I didn't. I grew up with movies and TV. And I think the thing that I think is underappreciated about Kevin Feige is that, like, while he obviously does have a background in comic books, I think I always try to, like, justify a lot of the decisions he makes, like, being like, no, he is not a comic book fanboy that's trying to get his stuff on screen. He is trying to make good movies and TV shows out of these things. And I think that, like, the way he operates is a lot more similar to just, like, a good movie producer than it just happens to be making movies about comic books, you know? I think that that's the thing that's underappreciated about the decisions he makes and why they adapt things certain ways. It's like, no, he's trying to make things... Because, like, I think I always say, like, my 58-year-old dad, who's never opened a comic book in his life, has seen most of the Marvel stuff. It's not because Kevin Feige cares about making the biggest comic book fans of the world happy. Not that he doesn't like them, but he clearly has something beyond that. And I think that that's the thing that's goes underappreciated when you're in the space that talks about these all the time.
Well, I think what's interesting is that it is so incredibly both in that all of that is true, and that is like we talk to people who've known him a really long time who say things about like they don't think someone could have done what he did as a deeply insidery fanboy. You know what I mean? That like, and there was even like Dave, you remember that like at some point someone wanted us to call this book Fanboy, like about Kevin Feige, and call it Fanboy, and we were like, that's not who he is though. Or if he is that, it's for like 80s and 90s blockbuster cinema. It's not really for comic books. But I think that that outsider perspective is so key. But he also made himself an expert in like he intentionally just like sat down, made himself an expert in comics, knows more than a lot of people consider themselves experts in comics, and values not shying away from the very comic booky nature of things. So when you look at some of the films before the MCU, they were almost afraid to be comic book movies, or afraid to like pursue the familiar costumes or whatever the case may be. And so Feige was always like, no, there's a reason this is a really popular medium. It's a visual medium. It's all these other things. And it's like, we need to like not pretend we're not making a very faithful comic book movie. But as you guys mentioned on your Secret Invasion podcast last week, when you hear Secret Invasion show, you'd be incorrect to think that that means they're making the Secret Invasion comic book.
Right.
It just means they're taking the concepts of the Secret Invasion comic book and putting it through as a film and TV fan would, a genre of interest, aka the like the espionage genre, you know?
Yes. Oh, one final one from me, and this is for both of you. If you're talking to somebody who's interested in buying this book and wants to get it, what is the one thing that you would say to somebody trying to get this book and they would be like, ooh, I gotta get it because of this? Either of you could go.
I can start, Dave, if you...
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. The thing that I love the most about our book, and the thing that I've loved the most of hearing people who have gotten to read like advanced copies of it, is they're like, it's so fun. And again, like I think that has a lot to do with Gavin, but it also, like, you know, Dave and I, we're fun. Like, we're fun people. But it's not a dry business book, and it's not a like you have to know everything about comics to understand it book. I think it has a lot of detail that I think people who love Marvel already will learn new things from it. But I think, I mean, hopefully, you know, like Kevin Feige making a comic movie, we've also made it extremely accessible to anyone who doesn't know anything and is just kind of interested. And it's just like a fun, propulsive, again, it sounds like I'm bragging, so I'm just going to give all that credit to Gavin, like propulsive fun read. You're gonna have a great time with it. It's a fun book.
There you go.
So yeah. Dave, what do you think?
Yeah, I would say that's our greatest selling point, I think, because it is a book for everyone. And because of that, I don't think it's really targeted to like the super fan. If you're a Marvel super fan, we'll have some stuff that maybe you haven't heard about, but will at the very least have a new perspective on how it fits into the whole picture. If you haven't, if you've watched just Infinity War and Endgame, I think this book does a good example of showing how the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe came about and sort of rose to the top. And most importantly, if you're like a film nerd, this book is just a great part of film history because it tells the story of how we took, a Marvel movie that they basically gave the rights to Blade away, and then became, by the time Infinity War and Endgame was happening, every movie they were putting out was earning $1 billion. They're introducing all this wacky comic book stuff to the pop culture zeitgeist, and in a time period where it was Endgame premiered the same month that Game of Thrones ended, so the culture latched on to a monoculture experience, and for a while that was the MCU.
Yeah.
So I think even if, as long as that's something that's interesting to you, one of those angles, this book will deliver.
Yes. Also, go ahead, Joanna.
Sorry, one last. Yeah, I kept
sure.
in my anxiety space writing a book because this is the first book Dave and I have ever written. In my anxiety space of writing it, I kept going to like Dave, to Gavin, to anyone who would listen. I'm like, I don't know who this book is for. Like, I don't understand. Like, who is this book for? And everyone is coming. I'm like, it's for everyone, Joanna. And I was like, oh, okay. I was like, is this a business book? Is this a fandom book? Is this a, like whatever? And they're like, no, it's everything. And I was like, oh, it's everything. So yeah, and I think it is at the end of the day.
Very excited to read. Jake, do you have anything else?
No, I'm excited that you guys gave your time. I'm super excited to read the book. I love any good oral history, and I think that the thing you mentioned about I think a perspective I try to bring when we talk about these things is from the film and TV production perspective, because I think that there are a lot of people who want to talk about how they're adapting the comics, and that is incredibly valuable too, but it's like, at the end of the day, these are things that they are made in the same way that any other movie are made. And so I think that the way, the backroom stuff about that is something that I've always been interested in, and I read anything I can. And so I'm very excited to see all of that. Especially, I'm excited to read perspectives of people who, have been in the industry for 25 years and then started doing nothing but Marvel movies and things like that. Anyway, yeah, I'm super excited to read it.
That is awesome. Dave and Joanna, I want to thank you both for joining us today. This has been a lot of fun. Maybe, perhaps, if and when this book comes out in October, perhaps we can get you back on and talk about some of the more juicier details when we get a chance to read it. If you like it, we'd love to have you back.
What you will think is juicy. Like, it's so, when you've like read your own thing too many times that you're like, what even are these words anymore? So I'm so excited to find, like, when the book comes out, October 10th, when the book comes out, like, I'm so excited to hear like what people are most excited to read about, because I have no perspective on it at this point. So,
oh man, it should be awesome for sure. Dave, first, where can we follow you? Where can we find your work?
I'm on Twitter right now as DA7E. It's just Dave with the 7 instead of the V. I have a couple of podcasts. I'm on one with Joanna called Trial by Content on the Ringer Network. I have one called Fighting in the War Room, where we talk about pop culture weirdness every week, and have for like over 10 years. And then I have a podcast with my friend Neil Miller, who runs Film School Rejects. That's a Patreon podcast at patreon.com/DA70 and Neil spelled the traditional way. And then if you want to pre-order the book, you could head to themcubook.com and follow some links there. You could buy it off the big sellers. You could buy it off independent sellers. Look it up.
Awesome stuff. And Joanna, where can we follow you and find your work?
I'm on Twitter at Joe Wrote This. I'm on all social media as at Joe Wrote This. My website is joewrote.this.com. And then you can find me on The Ringer on various podcasts like The Ringerverse, Prestige TV, and of course Trial by Content with Dave and Neil.
Awesome. And Jake Christie, where can we follow you and find your work?
Well, obviously, I got just as much going on as these two, but you can follow me on Twitter at the Jake Christie. Listen to the other podcasts I do, with a Psych Rewatch podcast at First Psych. Joanna, you can come on whenever you like. We're just starting season 3 tonight.
Is it like bring your own pineapple situation?
If you want to. The whole idea is because it's me and my friend Andre, who had never watched it before. We previously did we went through all of Monk, it was No Funkin', Strictly Monkin'. Right. And then we did at First Psych. And so, yeah, we're doing that. And yeah, AC is going to give all the specifics to the general MCU stuff, but just follow that, join that, etc.
Yes, yes, yes. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at AnthonyCanton_3. Follow the show at MC University Pod. Same thing on Instagram. Same thing on the YouTube channel. Check that out as well. We also have a Patreon, patreon.com/MC University Pod, where you can get our bonus content. Fast 5 is coming in July, folks. Fast 5. We recorded a Fast 5 episode. Should be a rip-roaring adventure for you guys to listen to. And of course, in June we had the Daddy's Pod, the Father's Day special, where Jake and pals ranked the 10 MCU daddies.
Yeah,
The 10
it's a
best
yearly
MCU
thing we do.
daddies.
It's a yearly thing we do where for Father's Day we basically 5 of us get pretty drunk and rank the top 10 daddies in the MCU. It's pretty. It's a rip roaring time. It has to be.
Like fathers or
No,
daddies?
like
Oh
daddies,
no,
like daddies,
all
like daddies.
forms.
Daddies.
Yeah,
All right.
it's become like a problem. I think this year we went almost 3 hours. I
That's great.
can't.
Yes.
It has to be behind the wall if I ever want anyone to look me in the eye again. But it's a really great time.
Yes, yes, and yeah. So appreciate everybody for listening. Appreciate everybody for supporting. Make sure you 5-star this podcast as well. So for Joanna Robinson and Dave Gonzalez and Jake Christie, I'm Anthony Canton III. This has been Marvel Cinematic University, and we'll talk to you next time.